or if you happen to have a copy of the Wall Street Journal, you can see an op-ed in there by our own president, Barack Obama. So busy, and yet he has time to write an op-ed. Amazing. In any event, he wants you to know that he is ordering by executive order a review of all regulations to streamline them, to make sure they're not duplicative or counterproductive. In his new PR campaign to try and persuade you that he's a moderate. He's an independent. He's not a radical ideologue. So we have the strategy down now to pretend you're a moderate centrist and pretend that you're civil when you haven't been civil yet. The Wall Street Journal piece by Barack Obama, it starts out, for 2 centuries, America's free market has not only been the source of dazzling ideas and path-breaking products, it has also been the greatest force for prosperity the world has ever known. Now listen to that. Wow. And I just thought a few years ago he was talking about spreading the wealth. That vibrant entrepreneurialism is the key to our continued global leadership and the success of our people. Notice he never says this when he's abroad. But throughout our history, one of the reasons the free market has worked is that we have sought the proper balance. We have preserved freedom of commerce while applying these rules and regulations necessary to protect the public against threats to health and safety and to safeguard people and businesses from abuse. Really lovely. But that's not what he's doing. I thought he wanted to transform society. That's what he said. Redistributing wealth, transforming society, nationalizing healthcare, nationalizing 2 of our automobile companies, nationalizing the student loan program, on and on and on. That's not a balance, ladies and gentlemen. That's an imbalance. Then ABC's Jake Tapper, he writes, President Obama today will sign an executive order to make clear the operating principle of the U.S. government is to strike the right balance with regulations, neither placing unreasonable burdens on business, burdens that have stifled innovation and have had a chilling effect on growth and jobs, nor failing to protect the public interest. Remember I read your story the other day? Obama needs to raise, or says he does, $1 billion, and a lot of these business interests, particularly on Wall Street, are turned off by him. This is another play for them. And a play for you, as I said, to convince you that he's not a socialist. He believes in the free market. The administration, the president writes, is making it our mission to root out regulations that conflict, that are not worth the cost, or that are just plain dumb. And then they stop. Then all the media outlets stop. Why go beyond the president's op-ed and press releases from the White House? Why actually figure out what the government's doing and report that to the public? Well, I got to thinking, and I don't have the research tools available to me that these major corporations do, just a little talk show host. Well, let me do some Googling and let's look at all the streamlining and free market activity that's been going on under this president and his administration. Here we are, the Center for Health Transformation. Obamacare will create 159 new boards, commissions, bureaus, programs, and offices of the federal government to carry out new tasks under the health care law. Most of these ideas are undefined and will be determined in the coming years under agencies such as the Centers for Disease Control, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. Now, they won't be streamlining this, ladies and gentlemen. They're just getting started. Among the new programs, the Interagency Pain Coordinating Committee, the Community Preventative Services Task Force, the Medicare Shared Savings Program, the Office of Indian Men's Health, the Food and Drug Administration State-Based Reinsurance Program, the Commission on Key National Indicators, and on and on and on and on. Reminds me of the Deficit Commission the president set up. Whatever happened to that in their proposal? Anybody know? Oh, I knew. Flush down the toilet. The biggest spender in world history, the most profligate, irresponsible spender in world history, sets up a deficit commission. While the commission's meeting, he's running up the deficit. When the commission's over, he doesn't even really comment substantively on their proposal because they can't even agree on a proposal. Remember just a couple of months ago, the president's focus was going to be on jobs, job creation? Actually, that was a few days ago. Now it's on civility and regulatory reform. Isn't that amazing how quickly they move? Those pollsters must be working overtime. More on the president's streamlining of regulations. Here's the Financial Times, and we've talked about this. EPA revokes coal mining permit in West Virginia. The Obama administration's chief environmental regulator has revoked a permit for one of the largest coal mining projects in the U.S. in a move that threatened to stymie the improving relationship between the White House and big business. Now, what they did is those mountaintop coal mining projects that are in place, they took this big one where they invested $250 million or so, which had been approved 3 years earlier under the Bush EPA, and they reversed course, retroactively denying the permit. And it sends a message for all of this kind of coal mining throughout the country that it's not going to be allowed. Pretty much. Certainly nobody's going to invest in it when the government can retroactively break you. They've since gone to federal court, and a federal judge today has allowed the case to go forward. The government argued it shouldn't be allowed to go forward. So you're not even allowed to protect your rights, according to Obama, in federal court, having spent $250 million, having to lay off hundreds of miners. I guess this is what he means by regulatory reform, to get rid of those stupid regulations. Then I looked at this one, all within the last week, the Alaska Dispatch. Alaska Governor Sean Parnell and Interior Secretary Ken Salazar are still waging a war of words in federal court over whether there's some sort of moratorium in place preventing oil exploration and drilling in the Arctic. What the Interior Department has done is they've lifted their moratorium, but they've made it so difficult to get new permits to drill that they're slow walking the process. So what's happening? Well, they're stopping the deep water drilling. They're moving those rigs somewhere else. And it's affecting Alaska. I have a story here. It's going on in the Gulf. They've essentially banned drilling off of Florida and much of California. But don't worry, they're only going to get rid of the stupid regulations. And they're not done. The EPA has pushed out regulations. We've talked about this before on CO2, even though they do not have a statutory basis, regardless of what the liberal 5-4 majority said on the Supreme Court in a preposterous decision by John Paul Stevens. CO2, what you exhale every time you breathe in and then you exhale, is not a pollutant. It's never been a pollutant. And of course, without CO2, you wouldn't have oxygen, because CO2 is used by plants through photosynthesis to create oxygen. We need greenhouse gases. Why? Because without them, we don't have what's called an atmosphere. And without an atmosphere, we become an ice ball. We need global warming. Or we have global freezing. Or we have a global ice ball. But why dabble in science? Because it's the libs, supposedly, who believe in science, and we, on the other hand, are supposedly the Neanderthals. But that said, they want to regulate all, eventually, all industries, all products that create carbon dioxide. But don't worry, the president wrote an op-ed today, and it's been reported in ABC News and all the other news outlets, that he's moved to the center. He wants to streamline all this stuff. Get rid of the stupid stuff. Meanwhile, they're still in a fight with Texas because Texas refuses to accept these new regulations. And a slew of other states have sued the EPA over these regulations, as have I and Landmark Legal Foundation. But that said, now the president wants to control all the regulations. Then there is this so-called financial reform bill, thousands of pages. But don't worry, it's a reform. I know this because they put the word reform on the cover page. And financial regulation legislation, the so-called Dodd-Frank bill. Now, you know, if Dodd-Frank is on there, it's like Bonnie and Clyde. Will require 243 new formal rulemakings by 11 different federal agencies. More streamlining. President's moved to the center. Okay, here's the deal. You have to ignore the propaganda from this White House, which is regurgitated by the media, and cut through it all. Cut through all the methane coming from the reporters, when they simply report the president's op-ed and what the White House is saying, and then they stop, you know that they're fronting for them. It took me 20 minutes to pull up all these stories. If I spent 2 hours on it, there'd be 50 more of them. This administration is spitting out regulations like no other administration, and these regulations are far-reaching. In many cases, these regulations are substitutes for legislation. Violations of separation of powers. I know this is very, very confusing to the morons that are hosts on MSLSD and the other liberal clowns. Ignore them too. But David Gregory, I want to call you out and speak to you. Is this the spreading of liberty? Is this the spreading of a lawful practice? What about separation of powers in the Constitution? Does that matter at all? Is this transformation? Or are you going to, next Sunday when nobody's watching, tell us how the president has moved to the center and how civil he is? Oh, Jobs, that's a yesterday thing. He'll bring that up again, if he needs to, next week or the week after when a new jobs report comes out. I won't rest. I won't rest till we create or save more jobs. Right. But he rests all the time. Now, this is what this president and this administration and this philosophy does. Or should I say this is what they do to the American people. This is what they do to businesses in this country. This is what they do to employees in this country. But they're in a frenetic deregulation mode when it comes to selling technology to our good, dear friends, the Red Chinese, who are arming up. To do what? Our friends are arming up. Their military is expanding so fast. They're stealing so much technology, or we're selling it to them. I guess it's aimed at us. Who else? But don't worry. There's this fine balance the president talks about between free markets and regulation. And they have apparently found it with General Electric here, according to the Financial Times. General Electric, whose CEO, Mr. Immelt, is really, really close to Obama. Big contributor, big mouthpiece. Of course, they own NBC and MSLSD, don't they? Although I hear they're selling it to a cable company. But that for another day, as I say. But listen to this story from the Financial Times. General Electric, the largest U.S. industrial group, is signing a series of deals with China this week in energy, rail, and aviation as it drives to improve its disappointing performance in the Chinese market. So we're shutting down mines in West Virginia. We're shutting down drilling off of Alaska and in the Gulf of Mexico. We're crushing our banks with all kinds of Washington regulations that do not apply to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And on and on and on. But when it comes to the Red Chinese, the door's thrown wide open. Particularly for Obama's friend, Jeff Immelt. As I've said 1,000 times and written in Liberty and Tyranny, and I'm not the first, crony capitalism. You see, if you're close to this president, and you take care of his party, and you contribute to his campaign, maybe they'll be helpful. If you're not, they're going to crush you. GE says the announcements reflect the promise by Jeff Immelt, chief executive, that its collaborations with Chinese companies, oh, that's a great word, would create global sales and safeguard U.S. jobs. Financial Times reported last year Immelt had been one of the Western chief executives to raise concerns about doing business in China, warning at a dinner in Rome last summer, I really worry about China. But don't worry. The Chinese have really streamlined their regulations so they can get as much technology when it comes to energy and the military and rail systems and computers and jets as much as they can from our biggest industrial group, the General Electric Group. Good job, Obama administration. We have to learn to live with less. The red Chinese, well, they have to learn to live with more.